I don't think I've ever asked you this question before, but what do you think you would do if today we lost everything? Yeah. What would you do to build from ground zero?
Well, really, what you have to do is a real
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. One of the things that we often talk about is overcoming the fear of failure. And some people might say, well, that's easier said than done. So I thought maybe what we could do today is to imagine some scenarios of having lost everything starting from the place of, if you imagine you've lost everything, what are the practical ways that we can rebuild? Because I think if we feel assured in the sense that we can do something about rebuilding, maybe we'll be a bit less fearful of failure. So maybe I'll start by asking you, Dad. I don't think I've ever asked you this question before, but what do you think you would do if, let's assume today we lost everything? Business, even personal finance, everything. Yeah. What would you do to build from ground zero?
Well, really, what you have to do is when you reach a point you have failed, you've lost everything, you got to do a real, what we call after-action review. Looking back at what led you to that catastrophic failure. And I can assure you, when you sit down and look at this, you will understand the underlying cause for the catastrophic failure. That's the starting point. You must learn from the failure.
So don't try to jump to solutions first.
Don't jump to conclusion. Don't start doing things, but just look at your catastrophic failure. That's the starting point. That's the lesson. It's I call the point of departure.
And what does that exercise do for you?
Really, it does for you is this. When you examine it, you will probably realize that you got lost in your direction, your true north. Somehow or other you lost it. The attention to the details is lost, and the discipline of action is lost. There is no more focus in the things you do. To my mind, when you have a catastrophic failure, 90% of catastrophic failures are not something that happened suddenly overnight. They were the things that gradually happened in your company, and suddenly it reached a point that you think that's normality, and then you reach a point, it's all gone. But the 10% are things like COVID-19, things completely outside your control. The external factors are completely against you. But most of the time, the catastrophic failures, they don't suddenly you wake up in the morning, your company is gone. It's not like that. It's a gradual process. So when you start looking at this, then you identify the things that brought you down. That's the starting point. When you start something new, you will say, I'm not going to repeat that. That's the key, because if you just jump into doing something new, you're going to repeat the same stuff that you did before. I can tell you this. At that point, after you learn the lesson, step number 1, step number 2, you have a choice of 2 roads to take. One road is to say, I'm going to go back to exactly the same business. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'll modify my approach to go and do it. Alternatively, I'm saying I'm going to change direction. I'm going to do an entirely new business. And that is 2 very, very different things. Let me start by saying you're going to do exactly the same thing. I'll return back to the second road later on, something new. If you're going to do exactly the same thing, the best thing to do is to look at success stories of people who've done that and what did they do. And a good example, very, very popular, and a lot of people know it. My vintage, Leon, not people like you wouldn't know this. Henry Ford. I've read a lot about Henry Ford. In the year 1899, he had 2 catastrophic failures. There are 2 car companies that he had, and both of them had failed. He went into bankruptcy, completely bankrupt. And people thought maybe Henry Ford would start something entirely new. Don't go into an automotive. Don't do that. But he went back. He went and pursued the same road. Stayed in the automotive world. Continued to do that. But he persisted. You must remember he had 2 failures. But he didn't learn from the first one. The second one, he still went and did it. He made mistakes in the second one. It's the third time that Henry Ford actually learned from it. And he founded a new company called Ford Motor Company. That was 1903. So the Detroit Automobile Company that lost in 1899, then when he came and restarted it, he came with a revolutionary mass production. This is what they call the Model T, the assembly line. So the approach was he revolutionized the assembly line, that he could produce the product a lot quicker, mass production, but with very little error, and the quality has improved. So the lesson was he learned from the past, and he went out there and changed the entire approach in which they were doing the manufacturing. That's how he succeeded. So, I mean, you can succeed in doing exactly the same stuff, but you have to figure out what actually went wrong, leading you to the catastrophic failure. Right. And he learned the lesson. It's the assembly line. The way in which they were doing it in the factory, that was a problem. So he made massive changes in the way in which they did that. That's how Ford as a company became very, very successful over the years. For years, it became very successful. That was how he started. So if you want to start new, if you want to follow the same thing, you must learn the lesson from your catastrophic failures and put in place all the things that will plug those gaps. So that's starting point. Now, everything else from there, Leon, follow the stuff that you and I talked about in our other episodes, how to do the game, the impossible, set audiences target, discipline, fraction, run the labs. And I'm not going to go into that detail for now. I want to switch gear to the second approach. If you say, okay, I'm going to abandon my business, the industry I'm doing, I'm going to start something new. This is tough because you may be going into an area that you are unfamiliar. This is unfamiliar ground because you have not done it before. The best example is to ask, the first question is, which industry? There are many, many industries that are doing very well. There are many industries that are doing very poorly. And for example, I know for a fact that airline is a very difficult industry. If you want to go into that, many airlines actually lose money. Hotels is a very tough business as well. Very, very tough. And so you got to go and look at business, the industry where the rate of failures is a lot less than the rate of success. So you should go into that area. But if you have lost everything, then you have to start with something that gives you very little appetite for capex, capital investment. So very light on that kind of thing. If I were to start today, Leon, I think the closest I would do a business that has very little like hunger for capital investment is trading. I will go into trading. I will look at where in the world can I find a product that is relatively value for money and relatively cheap, and where in the world can I sell this and make money from arbitrage. So this is where you come into what is called back-to-back arrangements. Yep. So the buyer and the seller, you are the middleman in between. So it doesn't need you a lot of capex actually. So when you think about it, Ananda Krishnan, in the same thing as Robert Kwok, they were all traders when they started as well. That's why they call Robert Kwok the sugar king. They were doing trading. And so because it did not require a lot of capex to do it. Another example, the more current known one is Tony Fernandez. I mean, he was completely doing something completely different in the music industry. He then bought an airline. He had no experience in the airline business. He bought the airline for 1 ringgit. Had 2 aircraft, 200 employees. So people thought it was going to fail. But it was very difficult. But all he did was, he knew there is an example somewhere else, and the example was Ryanair. He knew that Ryanair had a completely different model compared to full-fledged carriers. That means LCC, a low-cost carrier. So he said, if I'm going to go into an airline, I'm going to follow exactly the same model. I will fall into the same trap as the traditional airlines to lose money. But if I follow the model of low-cost carrier, which The example that really inspired him was the Ryanair example. So that's why he went out there. I think the company had the debt of 40 million ringgit when we interviewed him on this episode.
Yeah.
40 million ringgit debt. He paid 1 ringgit to buy this company, 200 employees. Remember, 2 planes. And so that's how he started. And he was very successful. And he understood the reason why most airlines lose money. Because they were very expensive, they cost a lot of money, and that's why he went out and did the LCC. That's an example. So really, choosing the industry is very important. After you've chosen it, the step number 1 is you assemble a team that you regard as your dream team, because you're starting new early on. I always think it will be wonderful, such a blessing to start an entirely new team. Find people of the same like interest as you do and the same passion for that industry. Ask them whether they want to come and join you. Preferably, find someone that has got money. And there are a lot of business people, entrepreneurs that have cash, and they're putting it in what's called passive investment. They put it in stocks that they don't even touch. They don't even look at it. They put some money in fixed deposit. But if you have a great idea, and you ask these guys, look, this is my plan, this is how I want to do it. Will you come and be an investor in this? And so if you can convince people, that is how you do it. But really, I mean, the point was you must do your homework. You must study it, produce your entire thing, bring people along with you that can help you to do it. My starting point was find an investor. Somebody that believes in you and somebody the same kind of interest and put money onto it. Then you assemble other people that come along with you, produce your plan, produce a business plan. Normally, if you have the investor coming along with you, prepared to put some equity in it, when the equity is put inside there, you bring along this guy to the banker, and then you present your business plan. You have lost everything, but this guy hasn't lost everything. He's put money into it. Normally, the banks, when they look at your business plan, and you have equity that's prepared for it, and if they believe you, they may say, we're going to invest money. And even if the banks don't want to do it, you go and see some other investors that are prepared to put money into this. So that's the starting point. And then you go out and do it. My case would be step number 2. I think that you start doing that. We run a lab. 6 weeks laboratory. Bring people that are going to work with you to do this, you middle managers that you hire, lock them together with yourself in the room. For 6 weeks, translate your business plan into an operational plan in 6 weeks. So that it's very detailed. After you're now very detailed, you hire people that can do this because, frankly speaking, you're starting new. Hiring people is going to be a big job. Setting up the company is also, registering the company is also, it will take you at least 2 to 3 weeks to do that. Registering a company, you can buy a company from the shelf. It will take you 2 weeks to do that. Changing the name, registering the company, finding an office to do it. I would prefer that you, since you're starting new, don't even find an office, work from home. And do that for now, but hire people. So now you have the plan, you've hired the guys there, then you move into the next step. That means cascade the targets based on the plans to the people who are going to implement this. On a weekly basis, you have the discipline of action to check that they are doing this. Then you go into implementation. All the stuff that you and I talked about before, when you monitor the progress on a quarterly basis, you will see you go to problem solving, all the stuff, Leon, everything that we talk about, the 8-step process, you follow them.
We have an entire playlist on this as well. Yeah. 8 episodes covering each one of the 8 steps. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can go to the playlist and you can check out that entire collection, that entire series of videos.
You must know what is your success factor in the things you're doing. And by contrast, how did you fail? Your catastrophic failure was because of those things that you now want to avoid, and therefore you reinvent a new way of working. So I'm totally convinced, Leon, that you can really, really make, let's suppose you change the subject. You're an employee now. You lost your job, you've been fired, you've been sacked from what you're doing. Follow exactly the same thing. You don't have a company to run. You're just a manager in a company. You've lost everything. Your wife has departed. You have left everything. You're sitting down there, lost your jobs, no income. So to my mind, you're desperate. And the Eagles had this song called Desperado. This is a desperado. So there are only two things you need to do. Find the jobs you want to do. Make sure it's a job you really want to write. The best letter you've ever written in your life, to try and make sure that they invite you for interview. Let's suppose nobody give you a job. You went for the interview, they still reject you. What is the next thing that you can do? You can tell companies that you want to say, don't pay me anything. I'll come and work for free for you to show you I can contribute. Even
I did that because nobody would take me when I was applying for a job at an advertising agency.
Exactly.
And even these small agencies, local agencies wouldn't take me. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm going to apply not for a job. I'm going to apply for an internship.
Exactly.
But with one of the big four in
Yeah.
the advertising world. And that was exactly how I got in. On the condition that in 3 months, if you like me and if I can do certain things, then will you give me a full-time job? And sure enough, I got the role.
Yeah.
And so I think that's good. Find the simple ways to make a quick entry into something. And I think that's a good thing to talk about. We talked about the scenario of imagining if we have lost everything, but I think this also begs the question, especially as you talk about new way of working. I think there are many points in the middle of the journey where we also need to think about new ways of working.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily need to wait for a failure for us to begin new ways of working. We have talked in the past about this thing called the second curve. Charles Handy's second curve. And this, in short, this idea of finding a second curve before that point of decline. And so I think for you, what do you think are the signs for a second curve? And let's do a bit of a live scenario right now, an active scenario. Let's talk about this podcast. This podcast still very much is a passion project between you and I. We don't have a crew to edit. We don't have there's no crew here behind the cameras. It's all our own gear. I press record on the cameras. It's just you and I basically doing this podcast. I do all the editing, social media. We have someone called Caleb who helps us on audio. We have someone called Daryl who helps us with some of our external engagements. But as far as the podcast itself goes, it's very much just still a passion project. So I'm asking right now, and all the audience can join us in this brainstorm as well. What do you think is the point at which we should start thinking about moving GOI from passion project, independent passion project, to maybe scaling it up a little bit, to applying a new way of working? Because I'm starting to sense that we're probably coming to that point of maybe having to make some decisions about what we do with this podcast. Do we take it a bit more seriously? Do we continue doing it like this?
Well,
Let's apply that to this scenario now.
Really, the point here is that I have already told you before, this is your thing. It's not my thing. I'm here helping you to do it. You have to make the call. You are the CEO of this and you want to create. So you must set out now, what is the true north for you? True north must be very clear in your mind. If you want to move out from being a passion, you must put it. Let's suppose you are going to say, I want to turn this into a business. How much annual profit do you intend to make? Make the number audacious, Leon. Make it big. It's impossible to achieve based on the current way of doing it. It will force you to figure it out. So you said you multiply that number, give it times 10, a number that you or definitely say you can't do it the way in which you do it. So then you have to ask the question, what are the activities that you need to do to achieve the times 10 profitability in the GOI? Obviously, it will tell you so many things. For example, you are not going to get people to come and advertise big time on this unless the viewership rise. And how do you get viewership to rise? It's nothing more than putting more and more external people to come on this rather than me coming here. You see most of our episode also beginning to plateau. But you realize this when you look at some of the external guests that we bring there, the numbers are really flowing. And also the other thing is this. It's very clear an untapped market for us to do is people outside Malaysia. Because most podcasts in Malaysia, including the best podcasts in Malaysia, Keluar Sekejap, they're still very much Malaysia focused.
Right.
The best podcasts in the world are international podcasts. So if you think that you're going to get this, you should get people of the international caliber on this air. We talked about it before, but don't just talk about, you got to do it. Really have to do it. You put the list of people you really now want to do it. And obviously, if you do that, as they grow quickly, you can't do it like a cottage industry. That means just you and I plus Caleb and Daryl. You got a team of people that needs to do it. Clearly, when you look at the diary of a CEO, it isn't just you and me talking. They also have multimedia. They also have view graph that come through it, the illustrations that are appearing. Obviously, you and I can't just do it the way in which we do it.
Yep.
So you have to step the gear up. So it can't be just doing the way. So I'm just giving you some ideas. But obviously, if you sit down for 2 days to figure it out, you will figure it out. The best way to do it, step into the shoes of Stephen Bartlett, the diary of the CEO. Therein lies the answer. And I call this leapfrogging. If you leapfrog, that means you get to the best practice. I call it the frontier practice. I hate to use the word best practice, frontier. Frontier is the way you should think about it, because there's no such thing as best.
I want to ask you on that. I guess the underlying message here is rebuilding.
Yeah.
And rebuilding, like we gave the example earlier of rebuilding from failure.
Yeah.
But you can also rebuild as a preventative measure. From any sort of catastrophic failure later on. For most people, this might probably also sometimes mean rebuilding on a sort of divergent path. So in this case, I am holding a few roles. This podcast is sort of something that's running. It's an adjacent hobby, which is maybe becoming more of a role. I'd imagine there are other people as well who are thinking of side hustles, other passion projects. What would you say to people who are in that position? Because obviously, if this was my full-time job, I would have done the things that you're saying a long time ago already. But sometimes there are some practical things to consider as well. So at what point does one decide that the passion project maybe deserves a little bit more attention?
It's when you want to excel, Leon. Everything in the word of excellence, the word that comes along with excellence is the word focus. Nobody achieves excellence without focus. And you and I talked about Usain Bolt. You and I talk about Carl Lewis. We also talk about even local athletes as well, about Josiah Ng. He focus. He's just cyclist. He focused exactly on one event. So if you want to do many things, to achieve excellence in it, you're going to be good, probably above average at best if you're very good, but you're never going to reach the excellence mode.
Yep,
so that's the reality of life. This is what I call trade-off. And I'm actually very impressed that you were able to juggle 4 balls in the air and you catch kind of really good at it. But if you're talking about excellence on the pedestal, Leon, no substitute. Excellence, the word that come together with it in parallel is the word called focus. There's no such thing as excellence without focus.
Yeah. The reason why I wanted to ask you this is also just encouragement to some other people, because the reality is that sometimes, in my case, just to be very transparent with our audiences as well, in my current phase, I believe that in different seasons, there are different points of focus. Sure. I think last year, the point of focus was me playing my interim role while you were on sabbatical. Because that was something that was new to me, which meant I needed time to be able to kind of learn on the job. With that also, it meant that I needed to be a bit more proximate with a team whom maybe I was a bit more unfamiliar with. And so in that year, I'd said that would be a little bit more of the focus, at least where I spend a bit more of my thinking. This year, the focus is more on my church role. based on the same parameters again, because it's a new role this year. So it being a new role, I've got to learn. I've again got to be a bit more proximate with new teams as well that are under me. And so I think for all of us, as we are weighing up these things, what is your area of focus for this season, and being very clear on what that true north is?
Yeah.
Because I think if you are not clear on what the focus is for that season, then you're probably going to feel very disappointed. Like I could probably feel very disheartened about the fact that I can't grow this platform maybe as quickly as I'd like. But I can sleep at night because I've identified at the start of the year that for this year, my true north is still to get the pieces right in the church, in the new job, where there are people, we have a large congregation.
That's why
depending on the role.
That's why the point about what is your true north.
Correct.
So if you are clear about your true north, and the true north can change over time, as you rightly pointed it out. And so at a particular year, this is your focus. And then your primary focus, the others are ancillary. So that's a trade-off you make. And so if you now say the focus is on the church, and that means you accept the fact that you're not going to push GOI to the level of excellence the way you envisage, that's fine as well.
Yeah.
Because you now do it with your eyes wide open. You now say, I don't leave a point of regret because I have not been able to bring it to a new curve, because you've decided that to be the case. And so this is key. Yeah. And for me, if you ask me personally, what my current focus, I'm back at work, but my focus is 5X. That is why I don't want to sit in the management meeting. Yeah, you guys are doing it. You see, I told you guys, you guys don't run it, and I don't turn up for the Ben. That's quite deliberate. And I sit there in the 5X project, and I talk about the 5X project. And that is where my focus is. And I'm very clear. I'm totally focused on doing that. Running the consultancy business is with you guys, you together with Ida and Rizwan. You go and I just sparingly come as and when needed. But really, and I really want you guys to do that. So my job is on the special project called 5X. That is what that is the focus of what I mean.
Yeah. Focus is important because, to be honest, I was having a conversation with Andrea, my wife, yesterday about some of the ideas, just thinking ahead for GOI as a platform. So obviously I mentioned for now, at least for this year, the focus is a little bit more on church. But of course, that doesn't mean that we're not thinking about what's next for the platform. And I kind of caught myself maybe jumping the gun a little bit to think, what are some of the other things that this platform can branch into and to veer into? And I was very kindly reminded by her on this idea of focus on the thing that you are already doing quite well in and make that thing excellent, which is essentially the podcast. Because I think I was jumping the gun to think, how can we already start thinking beyond the podcast to think about the other things that we want to build out of this?
Yeah, sure.
But actually it all starts with focus on this thing, focus on making this excellent, and then let the other things come as a natural byproduct. Sure, lastly, I want to ask, we've talked about rebuilding from a more tactical and practical standpoint, rebuilding in the area of financial gain, whether it be personal or whether it be business. But I want to close by asking, how does one rebuild from an ethical or from a moral standpoint? Let's talk about a moral failure.
Yeah.
How does one rebuild in that sense?
It's exactly the same thing after action review. You go through a process of looking back at your failure, moral failure. And if you say, what were the moral failures? Let's say we went into something that's unethical. You sit down and put a cool towel on the head and ask the question, what was the failures, my ethical failures that I went through? What are the lessons learned? In my case, and we talked about it in one of the previous episodes, my own moral failure in Sri Lanka and ethical failure was to do with the content of LPG that we're putting into the cylinders. And to cut a long story short, in discussions with the government of Sri Lanka, it was agreed that we would reduce the content of the LPG but kept the price constant. That was in line with international standard. That was how the government allowed us to have our first price increase. But I was not allowed to go and announce that. And so I made a mistake. This is, I call it an ethical mistake. And that was a mistake I learned from. From that, how did I get out from it? That failure was the birth of a new framework for me. The new framework is how to deal with ethics in business. And so the framework is, there are 3 circles. White circle, that means everything that's ethical, proper, and legal. The black circle is the one that is illegal, unethical, wrong. The gray is the one that is somewhere in between. That means not exactly ethical, not exactly unethical, but it's really gray. This is the problem. When you talk about ethics, I'm not talking about things that are in the black circle, because obviously something you don't do. So this is the 3 steps, 3 lessons learned for me, having done that. Lesson number 1, never make ethical decision on your own, because using one conscience. Number 2, having now brought more people to do this, write down the facts of the case and the options available on a piece of paper to justify why option C is better than A and B. Number 3, put it through a litmus test. That means if you've implemented option C and your whole write-up is put out in the social media, which you originally kept by yourself, can you defend your action in the social media in the glare of public scrutiny? If you cannot defend it in the glare of public scrutiny, it is obvious that you made a fatal mistake in a moral and ethical sense. So to me, it's much the same as business mistakes. Learning from the failure, put the lessons very clearly so that you avoid falling into the same trap. Then you can progress. It's exactly the same thing.
Well, hopefully today's episode gives you some practical tools, some assurance as well on how to rebuild. And hopefully, as we know that we have the tools to rebuild, that we won't be afraid of maybe taking some losses, because I think we can all agree that sometimes in the pursuit of a larger win in the long run, sometimes in order to get there, you have to be willing to take some losses as well. And so hopefully this conversation has been helpful. We just want to say thank you for listening to yet another episode of the Game of Impossible podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, we encourage you to hit subscribe on both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We also post short form content on both our IG and TikTok. Episodes go up live every Friday at 6 a.m. We look forward to seeing you next week.